what is your personal objective while working in the NFT space? Is there a specific mission that you wish to accomplish, something that you really have passion for?
My main passion lies really in art and culture. And I guess when NFTs really came up, it struck me as a field of great experiments. And if there's something I'm most passionate about, I think it's experimentation and helping artists that I feel are conducting vital and important experiments that fit into our time.
Are we talking technicalities? Is this a technical approach where you say this is an experiment? You have an example for us?
Can be technical, but I mean it more in something that expands on the question or the research into what is the culture of our time, what is the art of our time. How do we relate to each other and our environment and the world and these communication systems that we interact with on a daily basis? Experiments that kind of help us understand where we are as humans at this specific point in time and how that relates to both the past and the future.
That's super interesting. I mean, that is exactly what NFTs are at the end of the day. You create digital art, you protect it through the means of an NFT, and then you do something that I've never seen in the art world before. You create a community. And that is unique with NFTs. You've done a great work and endeavor with Sam Spratt's Monument game. Can you give us some insights, especially when it comes to community building? How did that work? What is the outcome? What was your personal experience with that amazing work?
So Sam is a very interesting example because I think under the surface, the main part of his actual artwork is community building. He is at first sight a digital painter, and on second sight, he's actually a cult leader. He built his series of Lucy, which is a narrative series of paintings that revolves around growing out of isolation and becoming connected to a network of people. He actually used the technology to have people interact in different ways with each other around his painting. So in specific, the Monument game, the exhibition that we did with him for the artwork that of the same name in Venice earlier this year, people could leave observations on the painting. And the painting, in a sense, was the starting point for a communal discourse on what is actually on the painting. And Sam, very, very succinctly used the technology to push people, incentivize people into a direction, into actually communicating with each other and into debating what they were actually seeing. And so, we've seen with him that this aspect of community building, which in many ways is a hollow word on Twitter, but kind of with him really has depth, can be a great driver for using NFTs as a technology. Because in his specific case, you need the technology to participate in the painting. There's things that can only be done with this technology, and I think that's most important to us from a technological perspective. Is it not just an NFT because it can be an NFT, but because it needs to be an NFT? And with many of his works, they need to be an NFT.
Just to give me an understanding. So there was an interaction. Everybody could leave their comment on the game. This is what I understood. And did that really grow into or blend into the artwork? And how? Were the new NFTs created, or how did that work?
The painting, the Monument game, is a monumental painting. Think of I only come up with the German term at the moment, a Wimmelbild, a really dense, big picture, Hieronymus Bosch-like picture with thousands of stories in it. And the first iteration of the game was played last year online, where collectors could purchase tickets to the game, which was an edition of 256 player tickets, and then they could leave observations on any point in the game. I think the observations were a max of 400 characters, and they were free to write whatever they wanted to write. There is a Council of Lucy, which is almost like the cult or the wise men, quote unquote, around Sam that voted on these observations, and there was 3 council seats to be won by all the players. So the council welcomed 3 new members into the council through this game, and it was not a quantifiable way to win. It was not a high score or anything like that. It was really, as Sam says, leaving a piece of oneself and leaving a text that resonated with both the painting, with the reader, and also, kind of felt true to the person who wrote it. And we played this game for the second time then in Venice, where only people who came to the exhibition could leave an observation. And the observations were like wildly varied in Venice. There was really deep personal notes. There was extremely superficial scribbles on the other end of the spectrum. And it was interesting to see how the audience was challenged by the prompt of, hey, here's a painting. You can leave something on this painting, and it will be woven into the fabric of the actual painting. The observation will be put on chain and stored in perpetuity with the painting. So let's see how we will play this game in the future. I think there's many future iterations of the Monument game to be played, and to figure out how Sam's painting is received in different places around the world. I think it's very interesting to see whether different cultures approach this picture in different ways or not. What specifically they see on the painting and what they don't.
My understanding, my perception, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that the artwork lays in the evolvement. It's an ongoing piece of art. It's an ongoing, a living piece of art. And I think this is what makes digital art and NFTs in that sense really interesting. And as you mentioned before, it gives them a digital age, or gives them a future perspective to how we perceive and live art. Does this way of interacting and access to art make it more democratic? Do you have access for people who have never been in the art space? And can you open a discussion on art and living art through NFTs to people who have no intellectual approach or no otherwise possibilities to go to a museum? How do you think about that? Is that also an impact that you're wishing for, you're working toward?
So I actually think that the democratic power, if you will, is more the distribution network than the ownership mechanism. What I mean by that is that digital images are inherently distributed online. The collecting mechanism or the purchasing mechanism, NFTs as a purchasing mechanism per se, I'm not sure how much more democratic it is than, to buy something in a gallery or in an edition shop or in a museum shop or wherever you buy art typically. The democratic part typically comes from price points. And early in the NFT wave, we've seen, many quote unquote very successful projects later on have very low price points, which meant that a wider range of people could buy into something. But there is a kind of, ease of process, I guess, with buying something online, with buying an NFT, if you are crypto native in a way. So there is Zine, which is a British NFT platform, last week just released a very interesting painting series by the artist Parker Ito. Parker Ito made 10,000 paintings. They're not paintings yet. They're at this stage, they're still JPEGs. And you could mint these JPEGs, and Zine kind of build a mechanism around that where you could redeem these JPEGs as paintings, and they would be painted in a Chinese painting factory and then sent back to your house. And I think that idea as a process, kind of a play on how paintings are made and how they're consumed, I think is actually very interesting. And the visual outputs are extremely interesting because they are very much of the internet. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how these Chinese factories make these paintings. Yeah, I think that the real democratic nature or say widely distributed nature of these things comes from the fact that the distribution networks are simpler than the quote unquote traditional art world. And that the works are more accessible because they're on online platforms rather than somewhere in storage or in catalog that is not accessible publicly. So there's definitely an easier access for internet native people, but non-internet native people probably find it easier to go to a museum or a gallery and look at something. So I think it goes both ways.
It's funny. It reminds me a bit of the Currency Project by Damien Hirst, one of the first projects in the field, where you had to choose whether you keep the NFT or you get the physical print. Mm-hmm. But interesting was there was an edition, or there was a coverage later, I think it was by Henny, and they were showing who bought these NFTs and who changed into the physical ones. And the population, the people who went into that space were so completely different to people who usually go to a gallery or even to a museum. And they even emphasized that when asked. They said, we love the fact that this includes everyone. There is no glass ceiling. I can just be part of it through my computer. They even learned how to use the computer properly, to build a wallet, to have an NFT stored. That's an amazing progress.
We've seen this with shows that we've supported with 1OF1. First and foremost, Rafiq's MoMA Machine Hallucinations. They had 2.5 million people see this show in the Agnes Grund lobby at MoMA, and it was an incredible success. I think there is, with many digital works, there is less of a fear of getting close to something because it hasn't been canonized in the same way we think of value. So much of the public news coverage of art is about value rather than the actual art. We often read in average newspapers, so-and-so has sold a painting for so-and-so many million, rather than a discussion about the actual painting. I think with much of digital art, it feels more playful, it feels more accessible, and it also feels more appealing to a wide audience. So in the 3 Human One exhibitions, the famed people artwork we did, it was quite interesting to see that 4 and 5-year-olds reacted similar to the work than 80-year-olds. It was a really wide spectrum of age that approached this work in a very, very intuitive way, yeah. Where it might not be the same for a Rothko painting or a whatever.
Plus, if you put the Rothko painting to the Baylor, Fondation Baylor, do you think anyone looks at the audience and says, oh, that 4-year-old liked it just the way the 80-year-old did? But in the NFT space, that interaction is nearly mandatory. It's natural. It comes natural because you want to understand how your audience reacts. And that is really a huge paradigm shift in my understanding.
To be fair, I think the Baylor does incredibly compelling shows, and they actually position their artwork in a way that is very, very thought-provoking and very engaging. To me, it's clear, we live in a digital time. We can slice it and dice it whatever way we want, but at the end of the day, we all spend 8+ hours on our computers every day, and then when we're not on our computers, we spend another couple of hours on our phones, and we consume digital imagery and are led by digital processes. And that there is a native type of art for this age feels to me very natural. The same way when the predecessor of media in the 50s and 60s came up, that Warhol kind of started making still screens, was a commentary on economic realities of the time, economic and social realities of the time. And I feel many of the digital works are commentaries on economic and social realities of the time of today.
Would you want to tell us some insight or share some insights on your next project or your latest cooperation with the Serpentine in London? I hear you're doing a show with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. Is there a community aspect to this as well?
I mean, first and foremost, Holly and the Serpentine are doing a show together. We are just there to support. Holly's a fascinating artist that I've followed for many years, and I'm extremely excited and proud that we can help make this show come to life, because she works at a kind of spot on the map where nobody else works. She very early realized that identity is a really important question in larger AI frameworks. So Holly kind of crosses the fame threshold in her likeness in a large data set. So when you enter Holly Herndon in whatever, OpenAI or any other big data sets, you will get an image of her. And that is actually an interesting thing, because if you think about the way these AI data sets are built and how these systems work, there is an infinite amount of images that can be generated in latent space. And so why would typing the name in Holly Herndon generate an image that has similarities to actual Holly Herndon? It's quite spectacular. And then the second question quickly becomes, what are the actual cues? In her specific case, it's often red hair and her distinctive looks. And she almost makes things like subtext visible within these systems. Being a singer, she has a natural way with sound, and she created a model that is called Holly Plus. And Holly Plus basically allows anyone to sing in Holly Herndon's voice, which in itself is also quite a crazy concept. I would call you and my voice would sound like Hans Ulrich's. It would be really strange. Or my voice would sound like Holly's, or my voice would sound like you. These things are actually possible with contemporary technology. And they're possible to a way where I don't even need to speak into the phone. I can type the text in the computer and give it MIDI notes and have the computer sing a passage just out of written information in her voice in a specific melody. As far as I understand, for the Serpentine show, she works a lot with these singing models. She recorded with a bunch of choirs all across the UK and built data sets out of those choir recordings that the audience then can interact with in the exhibition. I don't know what it will feel like, but I assume, it will be like you being part of a choir or a performance, and the boundaries between your own humanity and the humanity that you hear from the speakers, but the technological enablers that enable this interaction between your voice, what comes back at you, the call and response that you kind of say in musical jargon. I think it's going to make for a really mesmerizing exhibition.
The artist that comes into my mind first when I hear about, listen to, and look at Holly Herndon is Cindy Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
It's like comes into your mind and you don't really know why. But on the other hand side, if you try to explain, it's just a way of growing into personalities, being personas that
Mm-hmm.
are combined out of her own being, human
Mm-hmm.
being, and all sorts of images that she has in her head. Cindy disguised to be whatever she saw or wanted to be, but it was always her. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow this is very similar, just on a very different level, also technology speaking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You think that this can grow even further?
One was Cindy Sherman creating personas and then reenacting them. The other is a digital system making up voices, images, identities, and that's at an infinite scale. So, I think there's a future path where there is not 8 billion humans, but a trillion humans, and only 8 billion of those trillion actually have a body. And the other number is all artificially, quote unquote, artificially generated. Because actually this term artificial intelligence is quite strange because, at the end of the day, if it passes the Turing test, is it really artificial or not? Who knows? Nobody can tell.
And who created it at the end of the day? That's it. Yeah.
And there's a really big structural difference to scalability in media or in, intelligence. Rafik Anadol often says, I don't work with AI, I work with intelligence. And having a system that is intelligent be able to ping things back and forth with it just generates different outcomes and is a structurally different kind of beast than creating 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 100, whatever things, because it just operates on such a different quantity level and also quality level. These things end up being independent of their author. They can evolve independent of their author, which is an incredible feat.
Does that scare you once in a while? Do you feel that this is without boundaries?
No, I think there's, my favorite newsletter is called The Pessimist's Archive. And The Pessimist's Archive always digs out old newspaper clippings of moments in technology when, people started riding up. This is scary because of that. People shouldn't ride bicycles that much. It's unhealthy. Women shouldn't read. It clouds their minds. We shouldn't have light on all the time. It breaks nature, whatever. And, you read through these articles from 1903, 1920, 1960, whatever age, and the narrative is always the same. The narrative is always, we don't know what is happening to us. It's going to break us, or it's going to break the world, or it's going to break the environment. And in so many cases, we've just seen that was not the case. When the first train was invented, people thought they would explode if they went over 30 kilometers an hour. We figured out that wasn't true, So I think with all kind of technology systems, there's always apprehension, but the history of humanity has been a history of technologization, I guess.
And of braveness and of try and error.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree to that. What do you consider a good NFT, a good art NFT?
I think there's two questions in there. One is, what is good art? To me, good art is something that challenges me and helps me understand the world a bit more than I did before seeing or hearing or feeling the thing. And a good NFT is something that uses the technology natively in a way where it's necessarily an NFT and not something else. Human One comes to mind. It's a sculpture, but at the same time, it's a living digital artwork. It's continuously updated by people. The metadata is continuously updated. And it weren't the same if there was no NFT component. The fact that there is an NFT component means that this digital thing, the digital soul in the physical shell, actually has a unique life of its own. And so, there's one right there.
I think you practically gave the answer to the next question, which is, do you think NFT art is poised to shape the future of the art world? And what changes are needed in the market to facilitate the widespread adoption of NFTs? Maybe that goes a bit beyond.
I mean, I think it just takes time. As more digital native collectors come up, digital native work will be more collected, and that's just going to kind of evolve. It's almost in a way a generational question. It's a question of digital literacy and also digital interest in digital systems and digital culture and digital technologies. Well, I think, NFTs as programmable certificates of authenticity absolutely will shape the art world of the future, and it will shape the art making of the future, and it will shape the collecting of the future. Absolutely.
The last question I would have is more on the market segments. Which specific market segments do you believe will be most engaged with NFT art? Is it more the classical fine art buyer that would be drawn into it, or is it the young native digitals? Or what do you think how this will evolve? Will it evolve automatically by the fact that the young generation will grow into it? Or do you think there is also a huge impact for existing, let's say, mid-aged fine art collectors to really dive into that market?
I think the interesting thing about art collectors is that many of them naturally gravitate to collecting new things. There is like almost an innate curiosity in many parts of art and the art world. And so it's really a matter of time for the user experience and the interfaces to evolve to a way where people can like very, very intuitively use them. Where I think you will see the most adoption is really the digital native, what we call like the digital native artists, the ones that work, that have their practice based in the internet, that that make digital imagery, they make video, they make AI outputs, they make conceptual art rather than a gallery or other spaces. I think that cohort of artists will probably have the highest adoption for NFTs. And then the other cohorts will kind of follow along depending on their vicinity to the internet.